Hi, I am Tom Dunlop, the founder and CEO of Summize. And this is my talk, which is talking about my transition from being a lawyer to becoming the CEO of a software as a service startup. So, really, just in terms of the background as to what Summize is, we're a software as a service company, and we essentially remove the low value manual tasks and frustrations around contracts. And it's all centered around the ability to create instant contract summaries, and we like to think of ourselves as the kind of lightweight platform for contracts. We have a clear focus on the time to value, the ease of use, and our approach is very much to kind of enhance and augment legal teams' existing working habits rather than trying to force behavioral change. So that's what Summize does. And in terms of what we're going to kind of chat through today, there's kind of four areas. The first is what my transition looked like from becoming from a CEO to from a lawyer to a tech CEO. And really the focus on this kind of entrepreneurial mindset prior to becoming an actual founder. The second is then what experiences I drew upon to help transition to become a CEO and really help kind of, I guess, establish the culture within the business today. The third is a little bit of a touch on kind of overseas expansion and what we've done at Summize, but also kind of a kind of different mindset that people could take in terms of international expansion. And the fourth, very much looking forward as to how we plan on scaling the business, and probably a bit more about the internal structure. So how we call them pods, but how we can essentially structure the business for success in that next part of our journey. I guess, starting with my transition from being a lawyer to a CEO, my start was very unconventional. From my teens until kind of early 20s, I was juggling kind of professional level sports, as well as studying a law degree, which is not, an easy task for anyone to do. And it would be the case that I'd, be waking up early before school or university or college, kind of training at 5 a.m., then going to school and then training afterward as well. And it was then balancing that with competing around the world at badminton. And it became a point towards, I guess, the end of my law degree that I need to choose between, am I going to be a professional sportsman or am I going to kind of pursue the legal route? And ultimately, something had to give, and I chose to pursue a legal career. And really, I guess, fast forwarding after that stage, I kind of progressed into the kind of in-house world quite quickly after qualifying as a lawyer. And very much kind of focused into kind of tech businesses. That was where I kind of had a very good fit with the company, but also in terms of a passion for the actual products that they did. And there's a great kind of, I guess, cultural mindset within those type of companies. There was all about kind of self-development, improvement. Probably I related to a lot from a sporting background, but also felt like a number of the people in the business were, going to start their own startup, or there was some kind of strange dynamic where it always felt as though you were kind of thinking like an entrepreneur in the business. And so naturally, I think when we're around these kind of people day to day, you kind of catch the bug as well. You start to think of your own ideas. And this is probably the kind of catalyst really for me to really kind of adopt this kind of creative mindset. And today I think that, I'm obviously considered probably a good problem solver as a lawyer because I would take a set of facts or documents or variables, but I'd be able to kind of like establish what the risk was, for example, as a result of that. So I'd take a problem and a set of facts and variables to back that up, and then I'd be able to kind of articulate what the risk might have been. I think what this kind of working in these kind of tech businesses and with these type of mindsets within these companies really allowed me to do is to start thinking, well, actually, maybe instead of thinking about the risk part of it, I could take the same set of variables or problems or processes and actually start to come up with a potential way of how I could provide solutions to that or improve them just a little bit better from where they were today, rather than always look at the kind of problem, for example. So this is where I kind of described that, before becoming a founder, I very much kind of focus on adopting this kind of entrepreneurial thinking. So I differentiate between, an entrepreneur and a founder. I think what you can do is very much kind of early on adopt this kind of entrepreneurial mindset. And then whether you become a founder or not is something that I guess is entirely separate. So kind of adopting this mindset, it meant I was kind of very well set up that when I was asked to essentially review around 500 contracts as part of an acquisition, and this was all manually, I looked at the tools out there. They're all very heavy, kind of legacy systems. You couldn't adopt them quickly. There was no kind of time to value in the near future, and time is definitely a very precious resource generally, but certainly as an in-house lawyer. So when I started the process, I kind of naturally started to kind of ask myself, well, surely there's a better way of doing this. Rather than accepting that and giving the risk profile, it was more of a how do I kind of make this a better solution? And this was really, where I was fortunate enough to be kind of sat and surrounded by a lot of very bright world-class software engineers in the tech business. And so it literally happened where I would walk up to, my business partner, Dave, at the time. I kind of revealed my big idea about how it could be improved. And then to achieve that, kind of thought, well, we could be on something here, because technically there was kind of ways around this particular problem. So I guess to kind of boil that down as to the answer, I guess, why did I start a business? I think it's really kind of a combination of the fact that I was, obviously a potential user of the system, and it was very much a problem that I had and I was trying to solve. But also working with others in the business who needed to understand contracts for different business purposes. And kind of working with those people who were very kind of inspiring, working in fast growth environments, scaling businesses and processes just generally. I guess the combination of that allowed me to kind of put two and two together and try and create quite an innovative solution to an obvious problem. So really kind of the big takeaway for me as to how I kind of transitioned from that kind of legal role to a CEO role very much started with that change in mindset. That was the first hurdle. And that was to kind of become an entrepreneurial thinker. And kind of when you catch the startup bug as a result of becoming kind of an entrepreneurial thinker and surrounded by the right people, that kind of led to ultimately to me kind of founding the business and really willing to take that risk as becoming a founder. But it's a useful distinction, and I think there's no I guess there's no downside in actually just adopting the creative entrepreneurial mindset and pursuing that within your day-to-day life as an employee within a company. I think it leads to a different mindset, it leads to a different way of thinking, which is no bad thing. But then from there, whether you kind of take that next step and actually start a company, incorporate a limited entity, and start to employ staff and go for funding is kind of a leap from that mindset. And it's really then probably more about 90% on execution versus the original great idea. So yeah, that kind of, I guess, talks a little bit about my kind of stages, I guess, in terms of I went through from becoming an employee and a lawyer of a tech business to actually founding my own SaaS company. In terms of the second part, which is more about the culture and what helped me transition to becoming a CEO. When I founded Summize and we received some funding, obviously I was tasked with growing out a team and started to prove that we could commercialize the product. And we did that quite quickly and we got some further funding. And then we started to expand our roles into commercial roles, so sales and marketing functions. And it's at this stage that I think you start to really think about what culture do you want to create? How can you get, you're very passionate about the products, you're very passionate about this idea. You've risked a lot to kind of pursue it, but how can you get a number of new employees that didn't have that pain point, that have come to work for your company? How can you instill the same type of passion within that type of those new employees? So it was at that stage that really, the background I had, I only really knew about the kind of high performance sport background. And that's what I could draw upon and relate to when I was thinking, basically, how can we win? How can we be the next big thing? So my view was, when you're competing at a very professional kind of world level in terms of sport, the main differentiator is mindset. It's not necessarily the physical ability or even skill level really at the very top. So it's more about introducing this to the workplace and seeing if we could replicate this kind of very, very kind of mindset differentiator at that level, because that felt that if we could do that and we get the right people, then we'll be unstoppable. In addition, when I looked at how I guess, trained or kind of focused my mindset when I was kind of doing elite sport, it was very much looking for those small wins. So again, it's not about kind of finding those big silver bullets that are going to get you to be, a $1 billion business. A lot of it is all about the kind of little tiny things that you might do that give you that one bit of a kind of an edge on your competitors. Very much aligned with, I guess, the Kaizen mindset. And it's similar to how I started to become a creative thinker in the workplace. It was all very much looking at small problems and finding creative solutions to get that little bit better. And I think when you think about the principle of kind of Kaizen or continuous improvement, to me, it just kind of made sense and it resonated because change is never easy. Often change is seen as kind of, I guess, revolutionary and something that's quite immediate. And so our brains, like biologically, are designed to react with a kind of fear and suspicion about it. And ultimately, that kind of fear response leads to this kind of fight or flight response. And so the ability to think freely and creatively enough to deal with significant change is essentially blocked by the kind of fear response. And that is why a lot of these kind of big ideas, or certainly big kind of change pieces, fail because of that kind of just natural, I guess, reaction by humans. And so it's kind of a bit of a contradiction when you're trying to instill a culture of this kind of small improvements, kind of like trying to avoid that big reaction, but still you're part of a very disruptive startup and something that is there to essentially try and change how people do things. So it's a little bit of a contradiction. And I think as well, when you think of the word, we describe ourselves as being a very innovative company. And that's often the headline, during a kind of big company revamp or the kind of next phase of the company's growth. It's how you can then take that kind of goal of being a huge company, but then really instill it back down to being very much a kind of approach where you're taking small, manageable steps to kind of achieve that ultimate goal. So this is what we've done in kind of in Summize very well, in that we have various different ways of improving. We have our what we kind of obsess over is kind of how can we get 1% better next week. We literally have meetings at 5 p.m. on a Friday. We know that other companies might be sat there and have kind of clocked off for the week. We sit there and have a meeting for half an hour talking about how can we get better next week, because we know that that's a differentiator from us compared to potential competitors, that we're thinking about getting better while others might not be. Similarly, we have literally someone internally who is kind of dedicated to kind of making sure that we action all these 1%. So we have a channel within Teams that kind of records these 1% improvements. If they're dependent on other people, we bring them into the conversation. And really what we do is have someone who kind of checks up, make sure we achieve that 1%, have we actually actioned it, and is it now part of the day-to-day? So the Kaizen mentality really runs deep within the company, and I think it's a great way to actually achieve quite big change actually over a small period of time, but never kind of really instill that fight or flight response within your staff. So that's kind of, I guess, coming from point two being from transition from a lawyer to a CEO of a company. I guess then moving from CEO to more staff, and how can I create a culture that replicates this kind of passion to really drive this company as hard as we can, to another area, which was actually, we probably went against every maybe business book in terms of advice about expansion. And we actually went to internationally quite early on, particularly to Australia, into the US. But the reality is with our products, it does have very low barriers to entry. The reality is, particularly in English-speaking jurisdictions, we only really need to worry about where the data is hosted. The actual contracts themselves are quite universal documents. So to kind of create summaries of contracts in different countries isn't materially different. And so what we were, and ultimately you've got to, I guess, compare that with the fact that we were also in a bit of a race. We were a race to be relevant to these markets, and also a race to scale in quite a competitive market globally. So, when we're talking about investment and we're talking about future plans, it felt counterintuitive to not even understand whether we could scale to a potential country if we never actually tested or tried to get any particular clients to prove that there's appetite in that industry. So the way that we did this really, and where we went about it, was we started off with some very basic testing. We sent kind of messaging and social media kind of paid campaigns, so particularly through LinkedIn, to different countries. We just wanted to see if the use cases, the problems resonated in these countries where they've got a similarly good response. And then obviously once you get that kind of response, we went through those initial calls or demonstrations and really kind of used it as an interview process where we could essentially ask, do you have the same problems? Who would you see as, I guess, our competitors? But I guess similarly, who would you, or what are you currently doing? Are we replacing an existing technology, or are we just replacing a very manual process? And really for us, that gave us some great insights into exactly where we need to spend our resource and really focus our energy, which ended up being more focused in Australia and the US. And then from there, we kind of got onto a couple of accelerators, which it kind of can vary in the quality of them, but we've got a great one in Australia through Alan's Linklaters. And we were able to use essentially their network, but probably more importantly, their local knowledge to really understand how we can, I guess, tailor the product to that environment. And also got some really great instructions to potential customers, but also just the users, and just use that as a great user testing, which was hugely valuable to us in actually, looking at Australia as an expansion country. Similarly with the US, we have another kind of accelerator into the US and potentially one in Central Europe as well. So for us, it was all about small steps, testing the messaging, understanding if the use case and the problem resonated, and the products had that kind of product market fit. Then finding a way of exploring with local knowledge, ideally through this kind of accelerator type program. And then from there, really, we've been able to then go direct and expand further into those countries as well. I guess the final topic then that I was going to cover. So we've kind of got, transition from lawyer to CEO, the kind of culture and how we built this kind of high performance culture, international expansion, again, probably a bit against the grain in terms of when you would like to expand. So then really looking forward and the future of Summize really. And one of those is how can we scale our mentality? We touched on it before, but we have quite a high performance, I guess, cultural focus and continuous improvement. But how could we scale that internationally and really keep people aligned to this really core mission that we have to be a big company? And the best way that we believe the structure is set up is what we call pods. And the best way to imagine them is like a series of kind of Russian dolls, really. So the first pod might be, one account executive, two SDRs or kind of telesales type people, and maybe one customer success manager that kind of sits in that pod. They might be, aligned to a particular area, for example, UK law firms. But then what we can do is actually scale up that pod by saying, well, as well as that kind of mini pod, we add in, a small dev team, a marketing representative, and a person from finance, and maybe someone from HR, for example. And actually, what we can do is kind of wrap around a kind of a bigger pod that's all aligned to the same area. So they're all aligned to this kind of, maybe the private practice in the UK as a market. But actually, it's kind of encouraging that cross-departmental line and kind of making sure that we don't get that kind of typical departmental segregation that you get in companies, which stifles growth and creates friction between different teams. What you actually get is a really very diverse group of people, but they're all working towards a common goal, and it's a very focused goal. And it is still early days for our expansion plans and how this can really scale, particularly internationally as well. But so far, we do regularly hear feedback that, they've never worked in a company that felt so kind of cross-functional in terms of the teams, and also how they all feel very, very kind of part of that vision, that passion that we're really trying to instill in the staff. And I guess it all comes back to my original idea back in the original company after reviewing all those contracts and thinking there's got to be a better way, and get quite passionate about it because I was the customer. We're still managing to kind of keep that in new employees that we're adding to the business by adopting this kind of pod structure internally. So that's the 4 points I really wanted to, I guess, cover today. And I think if you ask me what the next 12 to 24 months of Summize looks like, ultimately it is very much focused on scaling, particularly in the UK. But obviously, as I've already touched on, we do have quite ambitious plans in Australia and the US. And I think just a big focus is to really maintain and see how we can scale this great culture of continuous improvement, Kaizen, and very focused mindset across international borders, and really take the product to the next level, where hopefully we can be the leading kind of lightweight contract management solution globally. That's all I had today. So if there was any questions at all, you can reach me by email. I'm on LinkedIn. And obviously, if there's any questions during this talk, then please do let me know. Thanks a lot.